Now, many people in various countries around the world suffer from human rights abuses by their governments, and U.S. President Joe Biden is hoping his Democracy Summit will help address these and other issues. Biden is holding virtual meetings with leaders from over 100 countries to discuss democracy's decline and ways to renew it. But will it work? Professor Yossi Mekelberg, Chatham House Senior Consulting Research Fellow, joins me now from London. Professor, very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we talk about the events of today, Professor, maybe let's look at who's who and maybe who's in and who's out. Who was invited, who was not. What does this tell us about this particular online conference?
Good evening. Yeah, it seems to be kind of an exclusive party a little bit that the United States and some of its allies decided who should be in or shouldn't be out, and it made it a bit controversial. While probably we can agree about many of the countries that are out there because they are not democracies, we might have some reservation about some of the countries that are in, for instance, Poland, the Philippines, Brazil. So there is a real question here if we can regard them under their current leaderships as democracies. But I think the most important thing in this sense is that democracy generally is in a state of crisis. Probably if you look around the world, there are probably less than 40 countries that can be regarded as real democracy, with separation of powers and checks of powers, and separation of powers and check of balances and the rest. And so there is a real issue of democracies that seems to be under retreat right now.
So what is the United States president aiming to achieve with this?
I think he makes a stand. And I think back when he was elected back in February, he was talking about, you know, the United States is back. It's back supporting its allies in Europe, in NATO, and dealing with the issue of democracy as a key issue. With this come, of course, human rights. And this is the great test for the Biden administration. His predecessor, Donald Trump, was not a champion of human rights and not a champion of the democratic process. And the United States still licking its wounds for what happened the 6th of January, when it was a real assault on U.S. democracy, the heart of American democracy. So I think this is time for democracies to regroup and really set the values, what constitutes democracy and how the democratic world is dealing with the rest of the world. Now, obviously, there are clash of interests at times. One of the examples, you mentioned countries that are not invited. While Turkey is a member of NATO, is very important for US and NATO security, it's not invited when it comes because it's not regarded under Erdogan as a democracy. And there are other examples of countries that while they are allies when it comes to national security, they don't regard them as democratic country. And this exactly set the challenges for the democratic world, how it deals where there are tangible interests, but these countries don't uphold democratic values.
Okay, we were expecting Russia and China to make some sort of statements about this, and yes, they did. Their foreign ministers came out making a lot of statements a couple of days ago. And interestingly enough, I can't remember whether it was the Chinese foreign minister or the Russian foreign minister stating, you know, almost equating to what's this particular summit to, you know, trying to revive the Cold War, you know, those ideologies back then. I mean, what's your take on this?
Well, there is an element of this that there is right now sense that the Cold War, maybe on a smaller scale, is back. Even the Russian foreign minister Lavrov mentioned today the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think he's exaggerating the situation, that it's similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis, what happens in the Ukraine or potentially can evolve. But there is a sense of real friction. We saw it in the conversation that President Biden had with President Putin. And we see, for instance, the issue of the United States pivoting towards Asia and China, and the supply of a submarine, nuclear submarine to Australia. So yeah, we have a sense of the return of the Cold War. But I think it's important for all sides involved in that to take a step back and remember what return to the Cold War, as it was especially the height of it in the 1560s, does entail.
Professor, I see another summit coming from the Chinese, maybe the Russians and all those that were excluded. Maybe we'll have another chat sometime soon. Thank you so much.
All right. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's Professor Yossi Meckelberg, Chatham House Senior Consulting Research Fellow, just giving us his thoughts on President Joe Biden's Summit for Democracy.